Hello again. I'm Lawrence Holgate, and this is episode 14 of Understanding John Stuart Mill, the book I have written on his famous book, Utilitarianism. If you have my book, and I've said this many times, you can follow along as I read and make comments. If you don't have the book, you can get it now at Amazon.com. All you have to do is use the search words Holgate, Houlgate, and the other search word would be John Stuart Mill, or just Mill would do it. This is the conclusion of the readings from my book. We're in chapter 5, and we're at the nearly end of chapter 5. I think it's one of the most important, if not the most important, chapter in the book, because Mill goes after those who use rights as the be-all and end-all of moral philosophy. Mill has no problem in talking about the idea of a right, but he tries to ground rights in utility. Of course, that's something that a lot of other philosophers don't want to do. They don't want to be utilitarians. John Locke, for example, talks about rights without grounding it, as far as I can see, anywhere or on anything or on some basic principle. He simply says there are rights to liberty, there are rights to life, etc., but he doesn't say, where do we get those rights? How do they come about? Mill has an answer to that question, but other philosophers who use rights as the be-all and end-all of moral philosophy really don't have an answer. I'm setting aside Immanuel Kant, of course, because he does give a sort of groundwork for moral philosophy, including rights. For example, in the abortion argument, people who are anti-abortion talk about the right to life without claiming what that means. Where do we get a right to life? How does that come about? The anti-abortion people talk about, the pro-abortion people talk about a woman's right to liberty, the right to do as she wishes with her own body. But again, that right is frequently not argued for. They just put it out there. Yeah, there is this right. It's absolute. Not even if it's absolute. So we've got the right to life on the one hand, and the right to liberty on the other, the right to do it as you wish with your own body. Who wins? How is this to be decided? Well, Mill wants to say you're going to cite it by finding out which one is firmly based on utility. That's the only way we're going to solve this debate. Now, there's going to be some objection to that, but that is Mill's stance. And that controversy, as I say at page 91 of my book, is not going to be decided in these pages of my book. The point of using the argument about the justice of abortion or abortion rights is to show that Mill is correct in saying that an application of justice alone is not simple, and is certainly not at all like a mathematical demonstration. There is nothing in the idea of justice that will help us to prioritize the rights mentioned in a way that will settle the debate. It has certainly not settled the controversy between pro-life and pro-choice opponents over the morality of abortion. Well, that being said, let's see where Mill tries to close this argument down. In section 5.8 of my book, the title is Justice Grounded on Utility is the Chief Part of All Morality. Mill says that appeals to the idea of justice and rights alone are not sufficient to settle debates over abortion, nor the debates discussed by Mill in utilitarianism. He discusses several of them: amounts and kinds of punishment, remuneration in cooperative industrial associations, taxation policy. These arguments about people taking stands on punishment, cooperative industrial associations, or taxation policies, there is some hope that these can be settled. These debates can be settled by a judicious use of the utility principle. In fact, Mill says they have to be settled in this way because justice is not an independent principle. Justice is firmly grounded in utility. The rules of justice are among the many corollaries of the principle of utility, although importantly distinct from other utility-based moral rules. Mill says this at page 58 of his book, Utilitarianism. Quote, "Justice is a name for certain classes of moral rules which concern the essentials of human well-being more nearly and are therefore of more absolute obligation than any other rules for the guidance of life. And the notion which we have found to be of the essence of the idea of justice, that of a right residing in an individual, implies and testifies that to this more binding obligation." The moral rules to which Mill refers include only those in which there is an individual right that both implies and is reciprocal with the named obligation. And at the top of the list are the class of rules which forbid mankind to hurt one another, including wrongful interference with each other's freedom. Mill is talking about the rules prohibiting murder and several kinds of bodily harm, including assault, battery, harm to one's reputation, that's what we call slander, and these days, domestic violence. The moral rules prohibiting interference with each other's freedom include rape, kidnapping, enslavement, and paternalistic restrictions on adult behavior, quote, "for their own good." All of these rules imply an individual right not to be harmed in the manner specified. For example, the right not to be harmed in one's life or in one's liberty. Now, Mill puts these rules at the top of the list of social utilities because, he says, quote, "they are the main element in determining the whole of social feelings of mankind," end quote. If men and women do not observe these moral rules, then Mill says everyone would see in everyone else an enemy against whom he must be perpetually guarding himself. Therefore, it is the rules prohibiting wrongful aggression or wrongful exercise of power over another which are the most marked cases of injustice, and those which give the tone to the feeling of repugnance which characterizes the sentiment. The next set of social utilities, somewhat lower on Mill's scale, are those that involve obligations not to withhold from an individual something that is his due. This may be, quote, "a positive hurt, either in the form of direct suffering or of the privation of some good which he had reasonable ground, either of a physical or of a social kind, for counting upon," end quote. Page 59 of Utilitarianism, by the way. Mill later mentions a breach of friendship and a breach of promise as examples. These examples, friendship and promise breached, these are instances of the principle of, quote, "giving to each what they deserve, that is, good for good as well as evil for evil." Here's another quote from Mill, page 59 of his Utilitarianism. "He who accepts benefits and denies a return of them when needed inflicts a real hurt by disappointing one of the most natural and reasonable of expectations, and one which he must at least tacitly have encouraged. Otherwise, the benefits would seldom have been conferred. Few hurts which human beings can sustain are greater, and none wound more, than when that on which they habitually and with full assurance relied fails them in the hour of need. And few wrongs are greater than this mere withholding of good," end quote. It follows from the duty to do to each what she deserves that we should treat all equally well, which no higher duty forbids, who have deserved equally well of us, and that society should treat all equally well, absolutely. Page 60. Mill writes that this is the highest abstract standard of social and distributive justice, although he immediately reminds us that this great duty has a deeper foundation, as a direct emanation from the great happiness principle, or the greatest happiness principle. Mill says this, continuing with a long quote, "It is involved in the very meaning of utility. That principle is a mere form of words without rational signification unless one's person's happiness, supposed equal in degree, with the proper allowance made for the kind of happiness, is counted for exactly as much as another's. One person's happiness is counted for exactly as much as another's. These conditions being supplied, Bentham's dictum, everybody to count for one, nobody for more than one, might be written under the principle of utility as an explanatory commentary, pages 60 to 61. If you recall, Jeremy Bentham was the godson for John Stuart Mill. One criticism of what I've just read you, one criticism of Mill, is that he's supplementing the utilitarian principle with what looks like an independent principle of distributive justice. If we are told that our obligation is to promote the greatest happiness for the greatest number, there's no implied instruction telling us to count each person's happiness exactly as much as another person's. Mill has previously said that the happiness of Socrates counts for more than the happiness of a fool. This is what he means when he attaches the proviso, quote, with the proper allowance made for the kind of happiness. But this seems to violate the principle that everybody counts for one, nobody for more than one, because the preference of those who have experienced both mental and physical pleasures do count on Mill's standard for more than those who have not. And this poses a dilemma. Mill must either take back his thesis that the utilitarian principle implies an impartial distributive principle of justice, or he must admit that it implies the non-utilitarian principle, quote, some people count for more than one. I think he's stuck there. Let's move on to section 5.9. These are cases that overrule a general maxim of justice. So Mill is now satisfied that he's proved that justice is a name for a group of moral rules that, quote, stand higher in the scale of social utility than other rules, and therefore put a stronger obligation on us. As noted previously, these are the rules that are based on an individual's right, and yet there are some cases in which the demands of utility will overrule a general rule of justice. Here's Mill's famous example of what I just said. Thus, to save a life, it may not only be allowable, but a duty to steal or take by force the necessary food or medicine, or to kidnap and compel to officiate the only qualified medical practitioner. Page 62. Let us assume that our utility calculations require that we steal food or medicine to save someone's life, or that we must kidnap at gunpoint the only doctor in town because he's refused to leave his house at 3 a.m. to give necessary medical help to a dying child. Suppose we say that utility trumps justice in these cases. Or should we say that justice aligns with utility, that it's not unjust to steal the food and medicine and not unjust to kidnap the doctor? Mill chooses the latter alternative, explaining that language allows this manner of describing what has happened because it allows us to avoid maintaining that there can be no laudable injustice. Let me say this. By presenting these examples, Mill foresaw by more than 100 years a 20th century thought experiment in ethics that is still under hot debate. It's called the Trolley Problem, created in a 1967 essay by Philippa Foot. It has several versions. Here's one popular scenario. Imagine an out-of-control trolley speeding down a steep hill. At the bottom of the hill, 5 children are tied to the track. There is also a side track that leads off the main track before the place where the 5 children are tied down. There's also one child tied down on the side track. Now you're standing far away from all of this, but you can see what is happening. You're gripping a lever that, if pulled, will immediately move the trolley, which is on the main track, where the 5 children have been tied down. It'll move the trolley onto the side track, where a single child is tied down. You can't break it. You're too far away to do anything, but you have this lever. Should you pull the lever and make it go onto the side track? Well, if you pull it, You will save the lives of the 5 children on the main track, but the trolley will hit and kill the child on the side track. If you don't pull it, the trolley will hit and kill the 5 children, and the child on the side track will survive. Try to solve that problem. It's exactly what Mill is talking about. Mill might say, well, there's laudable injustice here. Let's go ahead and move that stick to the lever to make the trolley go on the side track. In other words, it's laudable. It is unjust, yes, but it's laudable. I don't know. People go nuts over this argument. The Trolley Problem, it's called. Read Philippa Foot's excellent essay, and you'll be buried in journal articles on the Trolley Problem if you do a bibliographical search. I'm sorry, I'm stumbling over words now. It's been a long day, guys and gals. So that's about all. That finishes Mill's book, Utilitarianism. That finishes my book, Understanding John Stuart Mill. It's been fun reading this. I'd like to hear from you if you want to make some comments, or if you would like me to do On Liberty. I might do On Liberty next year, Mill's On Liberty, which is one of the great books of certainly of modern philosophy, if not all philosophy. These are the holidays coming up. I wish you well. I wish you a wonderful break, if you're getting a break on the holiday, and perhaps I'll see you next year when I discuss Understanding John Stuart Mill's book On Liberty. Thank you.